Yo, 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 what's going on? Welcome back to Cash Counter Sports. Today, we're going to be talking about the different ADP discrepancies depending on which website we're drafting on. So, with fantasy football, there's many different platforms. This can be ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper, Underdog, and there's different ADP based off the experts at each different website. So, today we're going to be taking a look at the different ADP discrepancies for each of these websites and which players we can take advantage of because of how far down they are on the ADP or how high up they are. So the first player we're going to take a look at here is Calvin Ridley. As you can see, he's going very high in underdog drafts, going at 32.3 overall ADP-wise, which is wide receiver 16. But ESPN, he's going at 64.9 overall, which is wide receiver 26. I think this is a very good wide receiver we can take advantage of. Because these seasoned veteran drafters on Underdog Fantasy, they're really taking a look at Calvin Ridley, saying he's got some high upside that they're willing to take him very early, all the way up in the third round. Now, yes, we know Underdog, you will expect to see wide receivers go off the board a little bit faster. But even taking that into account, that's why I have the wide receiver position rank numbers there as well, because he's going 10 spots higher in the wide receiver class alone. So on ESPN, if you're in your family league, I would suggest taking a shot on Calvin Ridley in the 6th round. It's not a very high price, and he could have a wide receiver 1 upside, I believe. Even on Sleeper, it's not a bad price point. I would see if I could try to wait till like the 5th round if possible, but at the end of the 4th is not exactly a reach in my opinion. Next, we're actually going to look at one of his teammates, Christian Kirk. So Christian Kirk, also an underdog. He's wide receiver 27, which is going around the beginning of the 5th round. And then ESPN and Sleeper, he goes a little bit later, generally around the same, like wide receiver 32, wide receiver 33. Not too terrible, but he's another one. Like I would say not both of them on the same team, but I would take a look at Christian Kirk in the middle of the 8th round on ESPN, in the middle of the 7th round on Sleeper. I don't think it's a bad price point for him. And yeah, you could say his situation got a lot worse with Calvin Ridley coming over. Calvin Ridley also hasn't played in a year and a half, and we don't know how he's going to do. I still believe Christian Kirk to be getting a lot of volume this year, and he definitely has good chemistry with Trevor Lawrence after what happened last year. I just believe that Christian Kirk is still going to be a valuable wide receiver at this position. All right, next guy we're going to take a look at here is Deontay Johnson. So in those underdog drafts, he's going at wide receiver 29. In Sleeper, he's going at wide receiver 34. And on ESPN, he's going at wide receiver 23. Now, this is interesting. This is different from the other two guys that we saw. His underdog value is higher than his ESPN value. Or his ESPN value is higher than his underdog value. And higher than his Sleeper value. So he's going drafted earlier in the position ranks in ESPN. Yes, he's technically getting drafted later on Underdog earlier on Underdog simply because the receivers go earlier and you have to start 3. So his ESPN value is higher and he's getting drafted earlier just because of his big name that everybody knows. And you see on the Underdog, the veteran drafters, they realize that there should be a couple of these young guys that they're expecting to explode up in front of him. And even on Sleeper, they're expecting a bigger fall off from him. So now if we compare these 3 all together, all at once, let's take a look at Calvin Ridley, Deontay Johnson, and Christian Kirk. Depending on the website and what round we're in, I'm going to take a look at a certain guy. So if I'm on Underdog and it gets to the 5th round, I'm probably going to be looking at taking a guy like Christian Kirk. I don't want to take that stab on Calvin Ridley too early in the 3rd round. I think that's a little too rich for me. But I'm going to be taking the safer option with Christian Kirk later on. And then if let's say we're on Sleeper, I think it might be an easier time taking either Kirk or Deontay Johnson, considering they both go literally back-to-back on ADP. Not bad options. Still, Calvin Ridley's a little bit early, but he's better priced than Underdog. But then if we're drafting on ESPN, I'm most certainly not taking Deontay Johnson at wide receiver 23. I would much rather take Calvin Ridley, like just a couple spots later than Deontay Johnson. And Christian Kirk, I still don't think is a bad option where he's at. But Calvin Ridley on ESPN drafts and Christian Kirk on Sleeper Underdog and Deontay on Sleeper is also a good option. All right, the next, we're going to look at another few guys, and we're going to compare them as well. The next guy is Chris Olave. This is one of my favorite receivers coming into the next year. I think with Derek Carr in his offense, he's going to have an even monster year, more monster of a year than what he had last year. So as you can see on Underdog, they're drafting him as wide receiver 12, the last receiver in the wide receiver 1 category. And then in those ESPN drafts, he's going just a tad later, wide receiver 16. Not too much of a drop-off, but a little bit after some of those other guys. The guy we're going to compare him to is DK Metcalf, a little bit bigger of a name. So on Underdog, he's actually going at wide receiver 15. So he's going roughly 3 spots behind Chris Olave. And then on ESPN, DK Metcalf's going wide receiver 12. So he's going just 3 spots earlier on ESPN than he is on Underdog, simply because of his high name. So now when we look at these together, Chris Olave and DK Metcalf, if I'm drafting on ESPN, I'm going to be looking towards taking Chris Olave almost a whole round later than DK Metcalf, as you can see by the ADP. I think the risk reward with Chris Olave is much better than with Metcalf, simply because Metcalf, I think he's going higher just because of his big name. And you can see they're back-to-back on Sleeper. They're a little bit closer with a couple other guys. But, the experienced Underdog drafters, I keep saying that just because everybody on Underdog's drafting with real money. They're not just some Joe doing a random mock draft. The Underdog drafters are taking Olave almost a whole round ahead of DK Metcalf. But then on ESPN, Olave is going a whole round later than Metcalf. That's where I'm like, I would much rather wait around and take Chris Olave and expect on his upside and his breakout to happen. DK Metcalf is also getting a little bit more crowded of an offense. They just added Jackson Smith and Jigba, as well as Zach Charbonnet. With also, you can count in that Geno Smith could very well not reproduce what he did last year. Geno Smith has had one good year in his entire career, and we're just banking on that to continue again. Now, yes, I don't think Geno's going to fully fall off, but it is within the realm of possibilities. All right, next person we're going to take a look at is Davante Adams, another huge name in the fantasy football game, usually one of the top-tier picks. Since coming to the Raiders, he had a little bit lower of a year last year, and now that Derek Carr left and they're adding Jimmy Garoppolo, it's going to be a little bit less of a year for them. So that's why you see on Underdog that he's going as a wide receiver 10. He's going a little bit just outside the first round and the top of the second round, usually on Underdog. But on ESPN, he's going as wide receiver 5. He's almost 5 spots up. And, Underdog has 3 receivers starting, and ESPN is only averaging 2 starting receivers. And he's still going higher on ESPN drafts than Underdog. That's wild to me. Davante Adams, when I'm drafting on ESPN, he's just a guy that I'm not going to have a ton on. Even on Sleeper, yes, he's going 1 spot back on ADP, but he's going 2 ranks higher than some of the other receivers in his range. And that's just not what I'm going to be willing to take the risk on. ESPN and Sleeper modes, I'm not going to have a lot of Davante Adams. I'm not taking a lot of Davante Adams to begin with on Underdog. I'm still going to be betting on the upside. He still has, he's obviously one of the top tier receivers in the league with whatever quarterback you give him. But not for the volume that I'm not looking to take him at the end of the first round. I would be much more looking at taking a guy like A.J. Brown. So on Underdog, A.J. Brown, he's going in the first round, 1.09, wide receiver 6. This is a guy I'm much more inclined to take because he's in one of the top 5 offenses in the league, attached to one of the top 5 quarterbacks who's also young, and he's on an up-and-coming offense. And you see on ESPN, he's going around wide receiver 8, so he's going a couple spots further back than what he is on Underdog, which makes sense. He's still not, one of the best receivers in everybody's eyes, but he's a guy that's going to go up and get that ball. He's going to go score that touchdown for you. He can occasionally rip off those deep threat balls. And I would just much rather take a look at drafting A.J. Brown later in my drafts than looking at Davante Adams. If I can wait till the middle of the second round and get A.J. Brown on ESPN, I would much rather take that. I would honestly, even on Sleeper, I would probably just straight up take A.J. Brown over Davante Adams if I'm at the 1-2 turn. That's what everybody's on Underdog doing. They're straight up taking A.J. Brown over Davante. So why aren't these people on ESPN doing it? It's because of Davante Adams' big name. I think A.J. Brown, he's just a high-powered offense. He's going to have a lot more chances to score touchdowns. yeah, Devontae might have a little bit more volume, more consistency, but A.J. Brown, he's going to win you those weeks for you. All right, now we're going to flip the script a little bit. We're going to take a look at some running backs. First guy I have up here is James Conner. Okay, now James Conner is going around RB26 on Underdog. Pretty solid numbers. This was a guy I traded for actually late in the year last year in one of my home leagues. Ultimately did not help me make the championship. But he was very solid for my team. He's like one of those guys that's just going to be consistently putting up numbers for your team. And as a result, I feel like that's why his numbers or his draft spot on Underdog is tanking a little bit. So now when you look at the round ADP, again, on Underdog, this is the opposite of receivers. We expect the running backs to go a little bit later than what they would for the running backs, or than what we would for the receivers. So that's why you're seeing the ESPN and Sleeper numbers going much higher than Underdog. But even just looking at position ranks, ESPN, he's going 4 position ranks higher than what he is on Underdog. Sleeper, he's going 2 positions higher than Underdog. I'm just expecting another solid year from James Conner. Like, I'm excited to draft him in Underdog in the back of the 7th, the beginning of the 8th round. I think that's a great price point for him. I think it's very difficult. It's not very difficult to take him in ESPN Sleeper, but I feel like there's some better options in his range. Like the next guy we're going to take a look at here is J.K. Dobbins. Now, last year he didn't have the greatest years coming off that torn ACL. But one of the things we like to follow is we like to take the player 2 years removed from their ACL recovery. So he had all last year to recover from the ACL. This summer he's going to have the full workload back with Lamar and a full new offense. I think he could have a primed, nice role to get a lot of carries, a lot of touches, and ideally a lot of touchdowns. And you can see on Underdog, he's going as RB18. Like, the people are trusting him as, I would say, probably the top of the RB dead zone, as people would say. And so, I said earlier, Underdog drafts, you expect the running backs to go later than the receivers. So, like, the Underdog running backs will go later than the ESPN Sleeper. But on ESPN, he's going a whole round and a half later than Underdog. And I just don't understand. Like, he's going running back 24 on ESPN compared to RB18 on both Sleeper and Underdog. So, if I'm in an ESPN draft, rather than drafting James Conner in the 6th round, I'm just going to wait one more round, and I'm going to take J.K. Dobbins in the beginning to middle of the 2nd round. I'm going to be smashing the button on J.K. Dobbins, where, yeah, it's a little bit risky because he's still recovering from that ACL tear. There is Gus Edwards in his backfield. I'm not too worried about Gus Edwards anymore. But I think this is an ideal spot for Dobbins to be a part of my team. And I would be gladly taking the risk on him, and that upside will be there on a week-to-week basis. Having Lamar Jackson, yes, he's not going to catch as many passes, but he's going to have a lot more efficiency because of the defense has to worry about Lamar keeping it and stuff, things along that lines. All right, I got one more set of players for us to take a look at here. So this first guy is Nick Chubb. Phenomenal player, one of the most pure running backs in the league that we all love. On Underdog, he's going as running back 4, going around the 2.02, which is pretty solid. It's a very substantial investment, around the same time, around the same draft spot as Devontae Adams is going. But then on ESPN, he's going as RB7. On Sleeper, he's going as RB8. So he's going just a little bit later on ESPN and Sleeper. But on Nick Chubb, I feel like he's a solid pick where he's at in Underdog and on ESPN Sleeper. I know in Underdog you don't want to be taking the running backs early, but I feel like at this price point, you have to be taking him. And the guy we're going to compare him to is Saquon Barkley. I feel like he's a little bit bigger of a name. Most people recognize him from his days at Penn State. He was the best running back prospect in a very long time. People are comparing Bijan Robinson to the best prospect since Saquon Barkley. So, similar to Nick Chubb, he is very high profile, just running back. He's a very pure runner, and he's just raw athleticism. So on Underdog, he's going as running back 6. Just a couple spots later than Nick Chubb, not too much later. But on ESPN, he's going as running back 4. And on ESPN, you're going to have to take him at the end of the 1st round or the beginning of the 2nd. So when we look at these two numbers side by side with each other, like, I would much rather be in my ESPN draft, and instead of taking Saquon Barkley in the beginning of the 2nd or the very end of the 1st, I'd rather wait and take Nick Chubb in the middle of the 2nd if I can. Or I would even just straight up take Nick Chubb at the beginning of the 2nd over Saquon. I think that Saquon also has some baked-in risk with his holdout right now. So things can change with that also. You have to keep that in mind. But Nick Chubb, I feel like he's just much safer. We have a whole another year with Deshaun Watson. He's got the whole offseason together, and they're working together every day. They got the new addition of Elijah Moore, so they can't just load the box on Nick Chubb like they used to be able to. There's no more Kareem Hunt. That's the big red flashing lights, on my opinion. No Kareem Hunt. Nick Chubb should be getting a few more passes. Now, yes, some people think Jerome Ford's going to get that role, but I don't think they're just going to bring some guy off the bench that they haven't really given any carries to and just give him the ball. I think Nick Chubb's going to get some, and I think Jerome Ford's going to get some. Chubb's going to steal some of those catches that Kareem Hunt used to get, as well as getting every single goal line carry, every single third down carry, short yardage carry. And he has that breakaway speed to rip off a huge run anytime he can. Saquon Barkley's very similar in that aspect, but I just overall believe in the Cleveland Browns offense more than the Giants offense. And I believe that Chubb will be able to score more touchdowns than Saquon will be this year. So that's why, like, Saquon, he's going higher in ESPN drafts because of his big name. More people are drawn to the name Saquon Barkley than they are Nick Chubb. All right, so now when we're looking at these on each platform, we're just going to quick review on each platform. ESPN, these are the guys I'm looking for. Chris Olave, A.J. Brown, Nick Chubb, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, J.K. Dobbins. All of these guys I'm really looking for in ESPN simply because of their discounts in ADP compared to the other websites. Now, if I'm going on to Sleeper's a little different. We have some of the same guys. We got Nick Chubb, Chris Olave, Christian Kirk. But Sleepers, I'm also taking a look at Deontay Johnson. I think he could be a nice safety valve for Kenny Pickett, but I'm not taking him at the wide receiver 23 price that was for on ESPN drafts. Thank you guys for joining me for this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts on these situations. Who are you taking over who in these wide receiver one-on-one battles, running back one-on-one battles? Have a good rest of your day.